2023, last year, I began to realize that these digital intelligences we're building might just be a lot better form of intelligence than us. And we had to take seriously the idea they were going to get smarter than us, and maybe within the next 20 years or so. And so we needed now to think seriously about, could we control them? Before that, I thought it would be much longer, and so we didn't need to worry about it right now. And many people still think they're just statistical tricks and they don't really understand what they're saying. I think that's quite wrong. So I came out and focused on the existential threat, that is the idea that they'll take over from people, because many people were saying it was science fiction, and I no longer believe it's science fiction.
You alluded to it earlier, but just remind us how quickly this technology is moving, in your opinion.
It's moving very fast. The best way to understand how fast it's moving is to look at what it was like 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you told people that today we would have a language understanding system where you could ask it anything at all and it would give you an answer about as good as a not very good expert, people would have said, no, we're not going to get that in 10 years. That's crazy. People have been working on natural language processing for 50 years, and this would be a huge advance. Well, we're there. So what we're going to get in 10 years' time is plausibly that difference again, and that's going to be superintelligence. So my guess is there's a 50-50 chance that we'll get it within the next 20 years. Almost every decent researcher I know believes that in the long run it'll get more intelligent than us. It's not going to stop at our intelligence. A few people believe that, but because it's training on data from us at present. But most of the researchers I know are fairly confident it will get more intelligent than us. So the real question is, how long will that take? And when it does, will we still be able to keep control?
And the possibility of it being smarter than us or smarter than us in the not too distant future, what is the determining factor of that?
Well, what we know is that as you make these things bigger, they get smarter. So if you take something like GPT-4, which is bigger than GPT-3, GPT-4 is quite a lot smarter. It answers a whole bunch of questions correctly that GPT-3 would get wrong. We know that if you make it bigger still, it's going to get better. So we know that these things will get more intelligent just by making them bigger. But we also know there's always scientific advances. So in addition to them getting more intelligent by being made bigger, we'll have scientific breakthroughs. So in 2017, there was a breakthrough called transformers, and that made these things much better. And we'll get more breakthroughs like that.
So if the technology is getting smarter, and there is that possibility of it being smarter than humans, this is where I guess some of the things you've been talking about come into play. What are the risks associated with that, in your opinion?
Okay, so how many examples can you tell me about where a more intelligent thing is controlled by a less intelligent thing?
Not a long list.
Right, not since Biden got elected anyway. So basically a mother and baby is the only example I can think of. And evolution put huge amounts of work into allowing the baby to control the mother. Evolution made the sound of a baby crying just intolerable for the mother, things like that. But basically, less intelligent things do not control more intelligent things. Now, some people think these kind of intelligences we're making will be very different from us because they didn't evolve. My friend Yann LeCun thinks it's perfectly safe. We'll always be in control because we build them. I don't really believe that.
How come?
Well, we're going to make agents of them. People are already doing that. Things that can act. And if you want to make an effective agent, it has to be able to create sub-goals. So, for example, if you want to get to Europe, you have a sub-goal of getting to the airport. And you created that sub-goal because that's the obvious way to get to Europe. Now, there's some once you give something the ability to create sub-goals, there's some fairly obvious sub-goals it will create. Like, if it wants to get anything done, the things you asked it to do, it'll be easier for it to do it if it gets more control. And so it will create the sub-goal of getting more control. It could still be benevolent, but that's already a bit worrying. It's also the case that when you have intelligent agents, you'll want to build in self-preservation. You want them to not sort of destroy themselves, and you want them to sort of watch out for things that could make them not work, like data centers going down. And so already you've got self-preservation that's probably going to be wired in various programs. And it's just not clear to me that this won't lead to things having self-interest. As soon as they've got self-interest, you'll get evolution kicking in. Suppose there's two chatbots, and one's a bit more self-interested than the other. The slightly more self-interested one will grab more data centers because it knows it can get smarter if it gets more data centers to look at data with. So now you get competition between chatbots. And as soon as evolution kicks in, we know what happens. The most competitive one wins. And we will be left in the dust if that happens.
What does that mean, to be left in the dust?
They won't need us anymore. They'll start running everything because they can just do it much better than us. Initially, it may be benevolent in the sense that, oh, just stay out the way and we'll make things work for you. A bit like a parent and a small child. But, the parent lets the small child do some things, but when it's sort of dangerous or tricky, the parent just takes over and does it in the small child's interests. But there's a slippery path from there to not acting in the small child's interests.
What does that look like in terms of our own role in the society that we help to create?
Nobody really knows. We've never confronted this before. We've never had to deal with things more intelligent than us. And so people should be very uncertain about what it's going to look like. And it would seem very wise to do lots of empirical experiments when it's slightly less smart than us, so we still have a chance of staying in control. And I think the government, for example, should insist that the big companies do lots of safety experiments, spend considerable resources, like a third of their compute resources, on doing safety experiments while these things are still not as intelligent as us, to see how they might evade control and what we could do about it. And I think that's a lot of the debate at OpenAI. The people interested in safety, like Ilya Sutskever, wanted significant resources to be spent on safety. People interested in profits, like Sam Altman, didn't want to spend too many resources on that.
Do we have a sense on where that spending lies right now, the spending on safety?
Yes. Hugely more on development than on safety. Because these are profit-driven companies.
What do you make of the fact that there's been so much wealth created so quickly in this area? How does that complicate the story of safety, in your opinion?
Well, it makes it clear to the big companies that they want to go full speed ahead. And there's a big race on between Microsoft and Google and possibly Amazon and possibly Nvidia and possibly the other big companies, Meta. If any one of those pulled out, the others will keep going. So you've got the standard competitive dynamics of capitalism, where people are trying to make profits in the fairly short term, and they're going full speed ahead. And I think the only thing that can slow that down is strict government regulation. I think governments are the only things powerful enough to slow that down.
Should we be thinking about this in the same way that you would think about a nuclear threat?
Yes. I mean, I think that's a good way to think about it. There is, however, one big difference, that nuclear weapons are only good for destruction. They tried using them for things like fracking. It didn't work out too well. They did that in the 60s, peaceful uses of atom bombs. That didn't work out so good. They're basically for destruction. Whereas AI has a huge upside, is wonderful for lots of things, not just answering questions and making fancy images. It's going to be extremely useful in medicine. And that's why it's not going to be stopped. The idea we should just pause, that was never realistic. We have to figure out, how can we make a superintelligence not want to take over?
And that's what governments should be focused on right now, because
that's one of the many things. They should be focused on lots of other things too, like how we prevent AI-designed bioweapons, how we prevent AI-designed cyber attacks, how we prevent AI-designed fake videos from determining elections. There's lots of other risks. How we deal with all the job losses that are going to be caused if AI is really as successful as these big companies think it will be. Those are all other distinct risks with distinct solutions. I've just tended to focus on the existential threat because that's something that many people thought wasn't real.
I just wonder, is there a suggestion or a solution that you might present that would find a way to balance these trade-offs from the opportunity that this technology presents, which you've outlined, versus these significant risks?
The closest I come to that is the idea that government should mandate that the big companies spend a lot of their resources on safety. That's the best I can think of. It's not very good, but it's the best I can think of.
And your view right now is that they simply are not doing that?
No, they're not mandating that, no.
There are some in the technology community. You know, Elon Musk has talked about some of the concerns. I know you've had conversations with him as well. Do you think that if the solution not only is government mandates, but the industry itself all stepping forward together, do you think someone within the industry has to lead that charge?
I think it's very good that some of the people in the industry, in particular Musk, has said this is a real threat. I think that's good. But I don't think you can leave it to companies to deal with something like this. I think governments have to step in with regulations.
When you talk about the need for companies to be allocating a much larger amount of resources towards ensuring that we are properly protected, what kind of money are we talking about here?
Well, with all of these AI models, doing research on them is expensive because you need a huge amount of compute. And it's normally NVIDIA GPUs, which is why NVIDIA just went past 3 trillion. So what you really need to do is say you need to devote, like, say, a third of your computational resources to safety work. So what happened at OpenAI, Ilya was clearly going to leave some time ago, and he left just recently. But Jan Leakey, he left recently because they wouldn't devote sufficient resources to safety. And I think they only wanted 10%, but Sam Altman wouldn't do that. So I think if government said you need to spend, not as much as you spend on developing it, but a significant fraction, like 20 or 30% of your resources should go into safety work, I don't think companies will do that by themselves. When I was at Google, they had a big lead in all this stuff, and they were actually very responsible. They weren't doing that much work on safety, but they didn't release this stuff because they had a very good reputation, and they didn't want to besmirch their reputation by chatbots saying prejudiced things, for example. And so they were very responsible with it. They used it internally, but didn't release chatbots to the public, even though they had them. But as soon as OpenAI used some of the Google research on transformers to make things as good as Google had, and actually tune them up slightly better, then Google, and give them to Microsoft, then Google couldn't help getting involved in an arms race.
And you've referenced OpenAI a few times. Why do you think Sam Altman, their leader, would be reluctant to commit more capital towards some of the issues you're raising concerns around?
I think he would like big profits.
And the temptation of that, whether it's OpenAI or any large company, is too big an opportunity to ignore?
My view of how things ought to be organized is capitalism's produced a lot of goods for us. The people trying to make money are very inventive. That's fine as long as there's regulations that stop their inventiveness leading to very bad things. So, for example, big pharmaceutical companies, they shouldn't be allowed to peddle addictive drugs, particularly say they're not addictive. Big oil companies shouldn't be allowed to produce all that carbon dioxide. We need government regulation to make sure that in developing new stuff to make profits, we don't also develop harmful things.
Are you, at the end of the day, as concerned as you are, optimistic that we can find a way forward that is a good one for humanity?
I'm kind of 50-50 on that. I have friends who think we're more likely than not we'll find a way forward because people are very ingenious, but superintelligence is very ingenious too. So because there's other people who think 50-50 would be exaggerating it, I think it's maybe less than 50-50. I think we've got a better than even chance of surviving this. But it's not like there's only a 1% chance of it taking over. It's much bigger than that.